today's project is to take all the things that are currently right here and make them be right here. The next step for the car is to get the metal work in the engine bay done and the body work in the engine bay done and get this painted. It's just going to be a black ceramic paint that's hopefully pretty durable. It's supposed to be durable, we'll see. But the goal is to get that done, and then I can move on to finishing the last of the body work on the rest of the car and get that completed. So today we're going to get the engine pulled. I'm got to pull the cooling system. Something you'll see here, this core support, the top of this is actually removable. And so it makes it a little bit easier to get this ridiculously oversized Coyote engine out of here. So we're going to try and get that done. It's kind of an involved process. So the first thing I'm going to do is put the car up on the lift, drop the exhaust and the turbos, and then we'll come back to this and pull the cooling system, the AC stuff off, fuel system, my lightly overbuilt strut tower bar, and all of the front end sheet metal bumper, etc. So all that's got to come off so that we can bring the engine and transmission out, and then we can finish that up. So I'm going to get started on that, and we'll show a few features of this as we go. A few things to show right now. Because of the tightness to the steering rack down at the bottom of the engine, I had to relocate the oil filter here, and then it's difficult to see, but down in the bottom of that picture, that is an oil cooler thermostat. It's an Earl's piece, so that controls the oil flow down into the front mount oil cooler. You don't want to run that all the time. You can actually get your oil too cold, so that should help keep everything good. There's going to be a bunch of sensors that go into these for the AEM Infinity ECU, and for my gauges and such. They're just not in place yet because it's all got to come back out. Beyond that, you can see the air distribution here. This gets fed off the manifold, and then that's the map sensor, and then the other lines run down to the turbos and wastegates for references. And over here is the fuel system. That's a magnet fuel regulator. It feeds up from the rear. It actually feeds into the rails and is wide so that it feeds into the front of both rails, feeds down both rails equally, feeds out the rear, rejoins, and then comes into this regulator, and then that regulator drops to the rear. There's an ethanol sensor in the back of the car. I didn't see any reason to try and fit that in this engine bay. There's kind of a small lack of space up here. And the front of this, if you look, the cooling stack, so we've got our front cross member here that's removable, or front core support that's removable, and then that bolts to the top of the intercooler, and then the intercooler sits on little rubber feet down on the bottom on a piece that's mounted to the core support as well. And then the radiator mounts to the intercooler for the top. The bottom sits on rubber feet. And this is a Volvo fan from, I don't know, something Swedish. And then we've got some custom made pipes here that feed the coolant in and out of the radiator. And then back here, these are the heater core pipes, or heater hoses that feed the heater core for heating the car because cold sucks. And we have the AC dryer. This is on a bracket that is kind of haggard. That's going to get redesigned. But the concept's there, and not in place are air ducting that actually bolts on. If you see this bolt down here, there's air ducting that bolts onto that and keeps everything shrouded and controlled so that it goes through the intercooler, through the radiator, through the oil cooler. I think that's the majority of the customization in the engine bay. There are turbos on here. I don't know if we can see them. They're way down in the bottom there. You can see there's some tape on the inlet to keep garbage out of the compressor. There's one of those on both sides, but we'll get some shots of those once the car's up in the air. It makes it a little bit easier to see. But they're sitting low, and then there is an EXA pump in the front to scavenge oil out of them. And those are GT 3582Rs, I believe. So that's kind of a quick overview of what we've got here, and we'll be able to see a little bit more of it as things come apart. So I'll take a few shots here so that we can see kind of how everything's assembled. And again, it was designed to be able to come apart easily, but the best laid plans. Alright, so it took about a half hour to pull everything out from underneath the car, but that's most of what this collection of parts here are. These are all the things that are easy to get out when it's up on the lift. So there's some intercooler piping, some out of focus shit, a bunch of exhaust. We have the wastegates, one of the exhaust manifolds, if my phone would focus. And then over here, we have the turbos, alternator, exhaust pump, and AC compressor. So that's all out. It doesn't look a whole lot different from the top, but now we have everything out that gets in the way of working on it from above. So the next thing I'm going to do is start stripping everything out of the engine bay, and then we'll pull the shifter covers out, pull the shifter out, and put the car up on some jack stands, and we can pull the engine and transmission out. So I'm just taking a brief break from tearing everything out of the engine bay to show everybody the way that the oil cooler and oil filter situation on this car is set up. So if you look down here where it would normally go, there is just a whole lot of things happening there, none of which are oil filter. So I've got a low profile block from MMR that connects out to dash 10 fittings. And then I've got some dash 10 banjo fittings to let me clock them, and then those feed into a Torx dual in, dual out oil filter adapter. And then that feeds into this Earl's thermostat down here, which then feeds out through a set of bulkheads, out through the front, down to the oil cooler down here. So it's kind of a mess, and half the reason for this part of this video is just so that I can record where everything went, so that I can figure out where the hell it goes when I put it back together. In the long run, I'd like to redo this slightly and do an improved racing oil filter adapter that has a thermostat built into it. I could eliminate about half of these lines. You know, that's you know, for every line you eliminate 2 fittings, and that's 2 more leak points. Somewhere in this, I'm sure something will leak at some point and leave me stranded. So at some point, I'd like to change to that design, just because it would be a lot more compact and a little bit less lines. But this is what I had at the time. I wasn't planning on it being quite this complicated when I started it, and I kind of dug myself into a hole, and that's where we are right now. But I figured I'd take a moment out to kind of show how this is set up and show the status on the engine bay removal so far. Everything's going pretty well. That's the nice thing about all the bolts being finger tight, is they're not very hard to remove. So the next thing I'm going to do is pull the shifter plates out so that I can remove the shifter from the tunnel, and then I can put the car up in the air, and I can go ahead and the car's got to go up in the air to get the that strut tower brace out, because I've got to pull the bolts out from the wheel wells, and there's currently wheels in there, and they're in the way. So we're gonna put it up in the air, get that out of there, and get the shifter assembly out, and then I got to pull the bumper and the valence and a couple more things out of the front, and then we should be able to get the engine and transmission out, and I can start looking at everything else that needs done in the engine bay still. So after about 3 hours of work, we have success. The drivetrain is removed from the car, and the engine bay is basically completely cleaned out. If you look in here, you'll note that I've got currently have a typical style Mustang 2 front suspension. There's a few modifications to this that aren't anything that's immediately obvious glancing at it in a video. But I'm going to change the way this is set up. So right now these are horizontal, and if you're familiar with Mustang 2, when you load up the suspension, this can have a tendency to move in this way and basically slide against it. So what I'm going to do is change this and put in a vertical post or vertical plate that these bolt to. So this, instead of mounting horizontally, will mount vertically, and you'll set camber with shims, and then that'll be reinforced in the back to keep the load good, so to keep the load paths good. So that's something that I'm going to be working on here very soon. I think it's going to be a little bit better set up, and I think it'll make everything a little bit stronger. So yeah, that's on the short list of things to take care of. Outside of that, there's a little bit of body work to do in here. There's a few things that have been modified since I originally started it. I added the brackets for the fuel lines and a few other things. There's these big slugs that are in the air quotes here, shock towers, and that's where the strut tower brace mounts, and those need to be welded on the wheel well side, and there's a little bit of surface rust just from sitting in the garage I need to clean off, and I need to weld underneath them. I couldn't do that with the engine in the car, so a few other little things like that, and then I'm going to go ahead and get this shot with I think I'm just going to use Eastwood's engine, the frame 2-part epoxy I think it's like some kind of air quotes ceramic setup. Not super familiar with it, but it's supposed to be relatively durable, and it's just a satin black. So that's what this is going to end up finished in. So that's about it for that. Here's the drivetrain sitting on the concrete. I need to get up in the attic and get one of my engine stands down so that I can put it on an engine stand and keep it wrapped up and out of the way until I'm ready for it to go back in again. And this is a trick I'm hoping a lot of people probably know about, but if you don't, this is a really handy thing to do. So this is just a little small parts organizer from, I think, Home Depot. But I've got all the bolts organized into little compartments inside of this container. And you see it kind of keeps it all divided up. And then on the top here, I've just written in Sharpie what is in each of these spots. It makes it a little bit easier to keep track of the bolts when I go to put it all together. And if you put a little bit of brake clean on a rag, you can wipe the Sharpie right off and use it for something else. So sometimes people put tape or labels or something in here. I find just writing on a Sharpie and knocking it off later is just as easy. So outside of that, I think we're pretty much ready. So you can see I've got everything kind of pulled out of here and ready to go. It's mostly cleaned up, mostly ready to finish, and hopefully get this marked off, and we'll put the drivetrain back in, and then it can stay permanently. So beyond that, I've got all these piles of parts here. This is the main reason I need to get this done, so I can put these in and get some more garage space back. So this is there's more organization here than it immediately looks like, but this is all of the piping and tubing and AN lines that make up all of the stuff under the hood, as well as the exhaust manifolds, motor mounts, all that good stuff. So this all needs to go back under there, so I need to get this all finished so that it can get permanently installed. So I think that's it for today's work. And again, if you have any questions, comments, just leave them down below.